Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons history, year 2011, the 38th year of Dungeons & Dragons history. And we're going to talk about it through the filter of clear: catalyst, location, entity, artifact, and relationship. Who is the specific catalyst for Dungeons & Dragons in the year 2011? Well, it is a gentleman by the name of Francesco Nepitello. And Francesco is the lead designer on The One Ring by Cubicle 7. All right, The One Ring at this point, comes out in 2011. Absolutely gorgeous, beautiful book. And it is it is a tabletop role-playing game based on Middle Earth, based on J.R.R. Tolkien's work. Now, this is important, especially from the perspective of Dungeons & Dragons, because specifically because D&D, more than anything, really is, in my opinion, systematized Tolkien. The energy, really the energy for Dungeons & Dragons is really coming, the overall structure, the overall look, the overall momentum really comes from Tolkien's books, right? And even in 2019, it's barely escaped that. The structure is still, like, when people think of D&D and most D&D games, and even the structure of the rule book, you're always going to have dwarves, elves, humans. Not a single edition has ever left out any of the core races that are in Tolkien's work. The monster manuals absolutely never leave out, orcs, wargs, or a very strong counter, stand-in for those. And so, the energy for Tolkien's work is hugely important within D&D. And here we see Cubicle 7 getting the license for Middle Earth. And Tolkien's estate will sell the right to make Lord of the Rings tabletop role-playing games to multiple companies, right? And it will bounce around between many, many different, at least 6 different companies have had the license to do Middle-earth role-playing games. And Cubicle 7 is one of them. Well, the thing that's really special about Francesco Nepitello's work is when he gets the opportunity to work on a Tolkien game, right, to create a Tolkien game, he does something truly, truly unique, right? And what that is there's really, really unique, the rules set, attacking and combat and interaction, there are really distinctly different rules within Cubicle 7, and it feels like a different game than anything D&D has ever created. Now, one of the reasons for that is it's an international game, right? Its native language isn't even English, right, to my knowledge. But it really adds a very, and Cubicle 7 is a European country, and this is a European game, right? It's a natively European game. Now, with that said, it really it brings forward that idea of where is the international community, the international TRPG design community, compared to the American design community. Excuse me. Well, the answer is, the reality is, Dungeons & Dragons is an American product, and the reality is Americans pay very, very little attention to international games. Very few are actually translated and brought over. Recently, Symbaroum was brought over. A lot of people love that game, but translations, they're pretty rare to come over here, right? Modifius is one of the companies that's really doing a good job, but the energy for TRPGs in America is American games. But increasingly, there are, each year, there'll be 1 to maybe a half a dozen. In a good year, there'll be a dozen real rockstar games that'll come over and really shake the American culture and say, hey, take a look at this. And people will play them in larger numbers, right? And actually, The One Ring is definitely one of those. The One Ring had beautiful writing, beautiful layout, beautiful art, real innovation in the rule set, and it's a stunning, if you're a true Tolkien fan, this is a great game. You're going to own Merp, you're going to own, you're going to own The One Ring, and you might skip Decipher's movie edition, which just had pictures in it, right? That's another thing, is when Lord of the Rings movie came out, there was a Lord of the Rings tabletop role-playing game, and it just used pictures from the film, right? It was pretty lame, actually, in many ways. But the One Ring is beautifully illustrated throughout the entire book with like paintings, right? And it's really fantastic. And it reminds us that the international tabletop role-playing design community is building games, and some of those games come over here. Now, American games are brought in much higher, the flow the other direction of American games to international community is much higher, right? That's a valve that pretty much goes, it flows a lot faster in one way than the other, right? But Francesco's Nepitello's work is really important, okay? What is the location in the year 2011 for Dungeons & Dragons? It is Valles Marineris, which is one of the craters on Mars, right? And or one of the areas on Mars, I should say. And Dungeons & Dragons has never been played on Mars, right? But in the year 2011, there is a lot of talk about human beings going to Mars, right? And there is a lot of tension and sadness and excitement and a lot of emotion attached to that, right? So Dungeons & Dragons players, Dungeons & Dragons designers, Dungeons & Dragons dungeon masters are fundamentally self-selective for a group of adventurers, a group of explorers, people who love Dungeons & Dragons. The Venn diagram over, how many of them care about space travel is fairly high, right? And so at this point, there are people who are really talking about, okay, well, is there going to be a journey of 1,000 humans to Mars in my lifetime? Can I be part of that? And there are nations that are talking seriously about going to Mars, right? But also in 2011 and unfortunately in 2019, all that we're really seeing is talk, and there really it really hasn't translated into anything actual. But in 2011, that Valles Marineris calls to many of those Dungeons & Dragons designers, Dungeons & Dragons dungeon masters, and Dungeons & Dragons players, saying, hey, you could be rolling dice here, and so it's an important location to remember. Who is our entity for the year 2011? Well, it is a gentleman by the name of Ernest Cline, and he brings forward Ready Player One, a hugely important fiction novel which ties very close to Dungeons & Dragons in that, so basically, the reason Ernest Cline's work is, it is a book that talks about a gamer in a near future who is absolutely fascinated and really obsessed with retro games, right? And this captures just millions and millions of readers in America, and it shows that desire for nostalgia, that desire for things that were big in the 70s and 80s, which absolutely defines Dungeons & Dragons, is very, very strong to this very day, and also can produce millions and millions of dollars. The books produces millions and millions of dollars, and the movie produces millions and millions of dollars. And there's a touch point to Dungeons & Dragons because it is directed by Steven Spielberg, which has and Steven Spielberg's work has incredible connection to Dungeons & Dragons. And mostly because TSR had the license for Indiana Jones. And so, Steven Spielberg's films were converted directly into tabletop role-playing games. And so there's a strong connection between Dungeons & Dragons and Spielberg, and that continues here with Ready Player One. So Ready Player One is a very important fiction novel in the year 2011, and it is bringing forward this idea of retro being incredibly valuable and nostalgia being incredibly powerful, and the idea that the value within Dungeons & Dragons is high and it is persistent, that there will always be a remnant at minimum, and maybe a lot more, a large community. There really is no more question of if there will be a community for Dungeons & Dragons. The only question is how large, right? And really, we've also seen that in many ways, it looks like the interest in Dungeons & Dragons, the low point is in the low millions. And the high point, our next goal is to get in those double digits, 10, 20, 30, 40 million players. And it's possible that at a global level, we could reach 100, 200, 300 million players, And there are absolutely video games that have that type of spread, but Dungeons & Dragons has never done it, right? What is our artifact for the year 2011? Well, it is the 4th edition Monster Manual. It is the last part of the triumvirate of the 4th edition core rulebooks. And one of the things that's really cool about 4th edition is there will be a lot of innovation in monster design. So 4th edition brings forward some brilliant, beautiful ideas. It brings forward skirmish monsters. It brings forward solo monsters. And there is more attention paid to how monsters attack, right? How they attack in formation, how they attack different types of adventures, sequencing, frequency of attack, all these kind of things. There is a mechanical rigor that is attached to 4th edition that has never been seen in any other edition. It is quite arguable that the 4th edition Monster Manual has the most clear, most innovative, really in many ways the most beautiful monster design of any edition, but it does not matter. And the reason why is the community is split over 4th edition. Excuse me. So basically, and here we see this situation where, you know, it really doesn't matter what's in the game. There are people who have just checked out and are not playing it. And at this point in the year 2011, Wizards of the Coast is fully aware of this. Hasbro is fully aware of this. And there are harsh meetings happening in those Seattle offices. And people are saying, this is a problem we got to fix, man. And we got to, and there's really, the shift is not, how do we fix this, but how do we get to that next edition? I think that talk is starting in 2011, right? And it's significant. All right. What is the relationship for Dungeons & Dragons in the year 2011? Well, the relationship for Dungeons & Dragons in the year 2011 is recursion, right? Now, recursion is it's a programming term. It's where you cursor back, right? You go back to a point, you redo something you've already done, right? You tread over the same area you've already tread, right? And this really happens a lot in Dungeons & Dragons. There are recursions in different points, like, for instance, print. Print is dead. Oh my gosh, look at 5th edition. It's selling like hotcakes. Print is alive, right? But no, print is dead. We're having a hard time selling those again. And so the reality is there is a recursion with print. Print is important. Print isn't important. Print is important. Print isn't important. The game has this recursion with print. It has this same activity, this same relationship with film, right? So there have been multiple films with Dungeons & Dragons name on it, and none of them have done well. But we keep recursing back to the film option, and the reason, and the idea that no, Dungeons & Dragons has a future in film. There is a multi-billion-dollar mega intellectual property here. There is a blockbuster within Dungeons & Dragons, right? And no one, not any of the designers, not any of the owners, not any of the dungeon masters, not any of the players want to give up on that hope that there will be a beautiful, film based on Dungeons & Dragons with Dungeons & Dragons name on it that captures the world's excitement, right? And so there's a recursion there on film. And then the other one is nerds, right? So Dungeons & Dragons, it had a real problem where, especially in the 70s and 80s, it was attached to nerdery, right? That if you were playing Dungeons & Dragons, you were a nerd, right? Well, in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of Dungeons & Dragons players that would stop. They would say, oh my gosh, I don't want to be considered a nerd. I'm going to stop playing Dungeons & Dragons, right? But then nerdery would come around and people would go, you know what? Nerds make a lot of money. Some of them are fit now, and nerdery would become cool again, right? And so people would come back and say, okay, well, I can play Dungeons & Dragons because it's cool to be a nerd. And there would be recursion. And even today, we're wondering, is it good to be a nerd? Is playing Dungeons & Dragons cool, or is it part of nerdery, right? So there's this recursion, right? That is a clear history of the 38th year of Dungeons & Dragons history in the year 2011. Please let me know, are you a nerd? Do you think that playing Dungeons & Dragons is fundamentally part of nerdery? Also, please consider liking and subscribing. and have a wonderful day.